an environmental scientist, and a corporate sustainability specialist. Over the last couple of years, he has dedicated most of his time in Asia, developing environmental programs with both public and private sectors. He is also the author of the book. The title is The Diversity of Life on Earth, From Heritage to Extinction. Sylvain is our first speaker for the Sustainability Speakers Series. This series is but one of NTU's sustainability initiatives in promoting and disseminating sustainable development. So my office at Sustainable Earth, we call it the Sustainable Earth Office, implements the sustainable strategy at NTU, which champions NTU's Sustainable Earth Peaks of Excellence. We assist faculty and staff to seek funding for interdisciplinary research. It is also our aim to provide funding and support students and organizations in their sustainability activities. We have supported initiatives such as Earthlink EcoVenture and NTU Environmental Awareness Campaign, as well as the CE Club for the NTU Laos Multipurpose Hall project in Laos. If this is the first time that you are hearing this funding support availability, I would like to encourage you to talk with us on your idea of a sustainable Earth. You may actually approach either my colleague Ryan, maybe he can stand up so people know that he is, or myself if you have a good proposal. Another example of the initiative launch was the establishment of EcoCampus in 2014. EcoCampus serves as a living laboratory for innovation. It provides a platform to engage industry partners and researchers to demonstrate their cutting-edge technologies on our campus. Coming back to the presentation, Siloso Beach is next to the busiest seaport in the world. I understand that Sylvain will highlight in his presentation the need to be holistic in planning and executing the development at the Siloso Beach Resort. Such development includes unique construction technologies and programs, as well as successful incorporation of sustainability concepts within a financially viable business setting and framework. I'm sure you will come to appreciate the challenges of embracing sustainability in businesses and how corporate sustainability creates value beyond environment management. Sylvain has also consented to stay behind after this presentation to answer a few questions. Let us welcome Mr. Sylvain Dufort, Director of Sustainability for Siloso Beach Resort. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for having me here. Very pleased to come to NTU today. So today I will focus my talk on a general view of what it makes business sense to adopt sustainability. And I will specifically focus on a specific case study of Siloso Beach Resort, which is an establishment I came to know very well, having worked with them over the last few years in the establishment of their sustainability programs. There's still a lot of misunderstandings about the concept of sustainability. Over the years I came to talk with a lot of businesses of various sizes, from MNCs to SMEs, and I always kind of get the same story. There's always seems to be a lot of break in businesses adopting the concept of sustainability. Arguments tend to range around key items such as it costs a lot of money to do so. We're going to have to apply a lot of change in a very broad way, from the change in management practices to the change in the various technologies implemented, and all this is associated with extra initial costs. There's still very few businesses which have a mindset in the longer term in trying to anticipate how the world is fastly changing, and the importance of changing right now for the future and to remain competitive in the business world. So overall, just a lot of misunderstandings, and I feel a lot of fear by businesses and even government agencies to do what is necessary to move ahead. And I do feel that things are going to move a bit faster now with international agreements such as the one in Paris recently. And there will be more and more pressures put by governments for businesses to adopt sustainability. But the point is that an early adoption of the concept will put these businesses into a competitive advantage. And when asked the question, does it make business sense to apply sustainability in the business world? Well, I think the simple answer to that is still a lot of business don't seem to understand or to have clearly identified the business case. So instead today of just talking about general concepts and what businesses should do and should not do, I will perhaps just focus on a specific case study of Siloso Beach Resort and how this specific business has managed to adopt a sustainable business concept quite holistically in its everyday management. Yes, a very holistic concept. And in businesses, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about the sustainability word in general. Some businesses, they will just see it as a CSR, more community marketing, just branding of the companies, and they don't really go deeper into trying to understand how this can benefit the business from the operational values in reducing operational costs on an annual basis, or valuing the company over time for the stakeholders and so on. So these are just generic comments, but let's go into this specific case study. So Siloso Beach Resort is a very unique concept from different perspectives. It's actually a resort hotel on the island of Sentosa in Singapore. But this concept has become very unique, especially over the last few years, with the adoption of a very special business concept which uses the hotel operation to sell rooms and a bit of F&B operation as well. But there's so much going on more than just the generic hotel operations. Actually, this resort has become a bit of an academic institution in some type. There's a lot of education going on. There's also a lot of partnerships with various government, private sector agencies, and there's been a lot going on within the business to really adopt more sustainable practices. So today I would just like to share some of these initiatives with you. Well, first of all, it's a very holistic concept of sustainability that we have. We don't simply see the sustainable concept as energy efficiency or water management or some of these common practices, but we have a much broader view of the concept, which really goes into how the resort was built to start with, how the energy technologies have been incorporated on a day-to-day management, and how the business interacts with society and how it can play a much broader educational role. So I would just like to share more about this. To start with, the framework is very important when businesses want to adopt sustainability. If you go blindly into an objective, it's very difficult to kind of put your strategy together and understand what progress you make. So what's quite kind of unique about this company is that there's been a very clear vision from the start, which comes directly from the owner of this resort. So the idea was really to develop an hotel on an undeveloped site on Sentosa, which was still a very well forested terrain at the time. And the idea to build this resort by really minimizing the impacts on the environment. So the first stage was really the initial vision of trying to do something a bit different, especially from the perspective that the owners come from a construction background, so they have a very good understanding of what the construction industry has, the impacts that this sector has on the environment and society overall. So they just wanted to do something different and to share this initiative with the many people who come to the resort and get to hear about it. The second main part of the framework was really the construction part, and there's been a lot of thoughts that went into building this resort by really minimizing the impacts on the surrounding site. The next phase was really about bringing all the technology in at a later stage. And I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding about this aspect. There's still a lot of buildings which are so-called normal buildings, not so well designed to be energy or water efficient or efficient from other perspective, and which at some point in their lifetime, perhaps the new management decides to adopt the more sustainable practices and to bring in a lot of technologies, hoping that this will create some miracles and make a very efficient building. But the point is that there's so much more that can be done the earlier you start. If you have the opportunity as a developer to start at the design stage, well, really so much more can be achieved in terms of the sustainability of the site. The next phase was really about management and setting up a range of procedures, standard operation procedures, just management practices, a lot of guidelines, setting up a management which will coincide with the vision of sustainable structures, not just from a structural point of view, but also from a soft approach with the management. And the latest phase of this sustainability strategy was really the adoption of sharing what had been done with a society, with stakeholders, a very broad range of stakeholders. And this result has been quite successful at doing this. I can share some projects a bit later on. So starting with the construction, what's very unique about the initial vision, there's been a lot of thoughts on how to build a resort on a forested terrain, and at the same time trying to preserve all the trees on site. So by trees I mean fully grown trees. So if you come to the resort, you will very soon quickly notice that there are a lot of trees everywhere, and some of these trees are very well incorporated within the design. There are trees like in very close proximity of structures. There are trees actually inside the buildings, inside some of the units where guests can actually stay and interact. It sounds easy actually to just say we're going to build a resort and preserve all the trees, but it was a very big commitment and a very big challenge in terms of construction practices, which to say are not very tree friendly, especially in Singapore. So starting with the construction, most construction practices actually are very damaging to trees. If the trees don't die during the construction itself, they will end up dying most likely down the road a few months or perhaps years after the construction because of the damage caused, for instance, through vibrations generated underground through the different machines used. So we actually apply a range of practices which really try very hard to minimize these impacts. Some very simple practices such as keeping certain distances between the main trees and the buildings in order not to affect the water cycle and the roots. Another interesting practice was that before the resort was even built, the resort hired this company, professional tree climbers that climb all the trees and put lightning protections on all the big trees. This was both to protect the trees, but when you also have so many trees on a site like this, you also want to make it safe for the people to be around. So this resort actually has a landscaping team. The maintenance cost is actually quite high on a weekly or monthly basis. Another important aspect was the use of machineries. Most machines in Singapore for construction, during the foundation works, they will use a lot of piling techniques which generate a lot of vibrations which can directly impact the tree roots and the trees. In order to minimize this greatly, this result actually applied much smaller types of machines which first were able to navigate through the terrain, up and down the hills, and also techniques which mostly involve drilling into the ground instead of piling. This really helped to reduce the vibrations by a lot. As you can see, there are actually some units. Well, there's different types of rooms stay at this resort, and one of the special rooms are what we call the villa wing, which is located behind the resort. There are actually 12 villas, which are uniquely designed. They've all been very well incorporated as part of the design, custom-made to incorporate as much as possible the natural elements and to try to minimize these impacts. As you can see, you have several trees. This is actually one of the smallest units. There are other units with many more trees and different types of construction techniques. But what's interesting is that different species of trees had to apply different techniques to preserve them. So this type of tree, for instance, is what we refer to as, well, we tend to categorize trees according to their rate of growth, actually. So there are species which grow much faster than others. And for those who grow faster, we simply encase them in this kind of glass structure. The reason being so that they can have a lot of space to expand. There's a few interesting points in terms of sustainable design with this concept. First, we can bring in a lot of natural light. Actually, the result makes use of a lot of glass, and usually glass in construction is not so sustainable, it's not so energy efficient. But if you look closely at the result, the glass is actually quite thick. It's a vacuum glass, and it's also a double glazed glass. We have films on both sides which will reflect a certain radiation wavelengths to make it more efficient and keep the space cool. I will talk a bit later about the cooling systems that we have. What's also interesting in this concept is that we actually replicate a natural part of the ecosystem, whereby in nature actually the falling trees, the falling leaves from the trees will accumulate on the ground, slowly decompose, and the compost generated will contribute to the tree's own growth and benefit other species within the ecosystem. Actually all the buildings are the result are on stilts. We didn't build from the ground up with cutting all the trees and flattening the terrain, because there's a lot of impacts generated from these practices. But all the buildings, even the main building blocks, which are quite large buildings, are on stilts. Building on stilts has multiple benefits, such as energy efficiency, such as allowing a species to migrate to the side, and other benefits. So the leaf in here will simply fall on this kind of wire. We have some kind of wire mesh with small holes inside, accumulate. When they get small enough, they will fall back down to the ground, which is located about 4 or 5 meters below. What's also interesting is that the overall result is built around the concept of being close with nature. So people can book into a room like this, feel very comfortable, but at the same time being able to observe a lot of natural behaviors. It's not unusual to have a lot of wildlife in this, such as small lizards or slugs and snails going up and down the windows. So this is all part of the concept. Preserving the terrain was an important aspect of this result. By preserving the terrain, I mean, well, a lot of people who come to the result, they don't realize the fact that they get a bit lost by walking around how the buildings are disposed. It's all because of the fact that the result is built on the side of a hill. We've got a steep hill, actually. There's about 30 meters of gradient between the sea level and the top of the result, where the reception is located, actually. So a lot of people walk around and they ask why. Actually, the reason is that instead of applying conventional construction practices, which in this case would mostly involve to do a cross-section within the hill, to cut all the trees, to flatten the land, and to build from scratch from a flat surface which is stabilized. Here we pretty much did the opposite of preserving the shape of the hills, preserving the trees, preserving everything which was there, and this played a big role in terms of preserving the ecosystem services on the site, which is especially apparent on this specific construction project, because I will talk about this a bit later on. There are quite developed water systems around the resort, making use of natural features, underground water systems. Preserving the landscape also helps to preserve the wildlife, the biodiversity, and a range of other benefits. If we look at the satellite map of the island of Sentosa, we can see that there's really not that much greenery that remains. These are pretty much secondary forest that remains on the island. If you look all around, you probably know there are all these big developments that have been going on, which have been quite, heavy construction practices. So a lot of destruction of the forest and the land, a lot of reclamation work as well. The result is pretty much within this boundary here. So right in the middle of this patch of greenery, which was also a very important, played an important role in the decision to develop this resort in a more sustainable way, to really try to preserve a bit of what was there. Preserving open space is another important part of the development concept. If you come to the resort, you will find it's quite a lot of open space, which is in Singapore is not so common. Why? Because the cost of the land is quite expensive. So most developers, they will tend to maximize the built areas to try to get the most return on investment through being able to sell more rooms. So here the concept was quite different. This is the green areas even on built structures. Reused materials was another important aspect of the development. This result makes use of a very high percentage of reused or recycled items within the core construction, such as cements, wires and metal structures, but also as part of so-called retrofits. Around the result, some key examples would include, we do make use of this material quite extensively around the result. This is actually one of the result's own products. This result is a bit unique because there's the result itself, but there's a range of other businesses which are very linked to under the same management. So we can actually build things on other sites and bring them to the result as a showcase and a test bed of various practices and technologies with a strong focus on sustainability. What's unique about this product? It's made 100% from recycled car tires. The manufacturing process itself is also considered quite sustainable. There's less chemicals being used in the binding agents and other elements of the design, which makes it a sustainable product. Another good example is the extensive use of recycled wood around the resort. Actually, we collect a lot of wood from unwanted sites throughout Singapore, mostly demolition sites, which in Singapore would otherwise go to the incineration process. As you know that in Singapore, because of the land constraint, most of the waste goes to a burning process in order to minimize the volume and then to send this to an offshore island for storage. But there's also a lot of issues associated with this in terms of the long-term sustainability. What's also unique is that we have our own wood processing facility on site, so we can bring a lot of wood, reprocess this wood, and then do a lot of things for retrofits, for even to make furniture. So a lot of the furniture around the sites are actually made in-house from recycled wood, but also from recycled metals and other elements. So we make all this on site. Tree roots are just fallen trees within the resort, obviously. In terms of design now, the overall result was built on the concept of maximizing the use of natural light and natural ventilation. So pretty much all aspects of the designs are very open. There's a lot of elements which greatly maximize the usage of these two simple concepts. Some examples will include, this is part of the central court, and you'll see that it's very open. We have an open corridor concept, for instance, which in many countries is taken for granted, but in Singapore, most buildings tend to close the corridors, which if you think about it, it really doesn't make any sense from an energy point of view, even from a cost point of view. If you consider how much energy needs to be applied to cool down this space, which are most oftenly aircon, to manage this type of buildings over time. Another important aspect of the feature is this central opening that we have in one of the main building blocks. This actually helps to capture a lot of the wind coming from the South China Sea, which can actually speed up through the design. Because of the shape of the buildings, which is kind of a cone shape, will actually speed up the wind speed and spread then within the central court, helping to naturally cool down the space. In terms of water flow, there's been a lot of concepts as well as part of the design. A lot of the back-end systems have been customized to be more efficient. Some good examples will include the piping systems. Most construction projects in Singapore or elsewhere, they will heavily use PVC pipes, which are these pipes here. As a result, we actually make extensive use of this type of piping, which is another type of plastic called PPR. Which is more efficient in terms of especially heat transfer. There's lesser heat loss within the system by using this type of pipe. We also make use of multiple valve system. This is very important in terms of good water management. It's actually the best way to effectively manage water flow within a building. There are of course many initiatives that the government can give various kits to retrofits, the sinks, the shower heads and so on, but this can only play a certain role. By having a multiple valve system, we can adjust the water flow exactly to the level we want it to be, even at the unit level. So let's say within the villas, for instance, we can have different water flows for the sinks, for the flushing of the toilets, or for the showers, to try to find a flow which is comfortable without being excessive. And we've been quite successful at doing that. Water treatment. This is the pool of the resort. This swimming pool is very unique from different perspectives. Yes, quite a unique concept. So the first unique aspect of this pool is its shape. Well, it's one of the longest pools in Singapore, with about 90 meters long. But the shape is actually no accident. The only man-made structure on the site before the construction began was actually a maintenance dirt road, which was utilized to maintain an old monorail system that used to run all around the island of Sentosa. It's no longer in operation, but there are still some trails that remain behind the resort. Anyway, the point is that the basic idea was to simply deposit the swimming pool on top of the road, and there are two main benefits of doing so. First, they did not need to cut additional trees. They also did not need to compact the ground further, which will have damaged and created more vibrations and so on. So just making use of natural features is actually a key concept of a sustainable design. Whatever can be used without modifying the initial shape of the terrain or the environment, well, is the best approach. What's also quite unique about this pool is actually during the construction phase, because of all the drilling that went on for the pillars, but they were actually very fortunate to discover in this process that they went through a very unusual piping system during one of the drills, and water started to come out. So it was thought to be initially an accident, and some contractors were called in to try to plug prevent the water from coming out, thinking that an industrial pipe was broken or something. But actually it was discovered that these thick clay pipes, which are very unusual, were actually installed after the Second World War by the missionaries to drain the excess water from the island of Sentosa to the South China Sea. And the reason for doing so was most likely to prevent disease at the time, dengue, which is still present today, but also malaria, more common at the time. So anyway, that's how we actually discovered that below the resort there's a natural spring reservoir, which is quite well maintained, and which has been quite well maintained as well from the decision of the resort to build sustainably. A very good, perhaps a significant contributor was the decision to preserve all the trees on the site. Trees actually act as a so-called, some kind of natural pump, if you want. They will keep the water table close to the water surface, which also means that to use the spring water, it actually naturally flows out. We need to apply very little energy to get this water out. If all the trees had been cut, it would have been very likely that we'll need to dig quite deep and pump the water up, which actually uses a lot of energy. So the spring water has been used for various systems around the resort, including the swimming pool, so it is a spring water pool. We also use the spring water for various subsystems, such as the flushing of the toilets around the entire resort, as well as for gardening purposes and general cleaning as well. What's also very unique about this pool is its treatment system, a very unique treatment system in this part of the world. First, if people who go swimming in the pool, they will notice that there's no chlorine smell because we don't apply a conventional treatment using chlorine. Instead, we use a main treatment system referring to a concept called salt ionization, where we actually apply a lot of salt to the pool on a weekly basis. The salty water will then be run through small electric currents which will interact with the salt crystals and generate some chemical reactions which will clean the water through this means. But more than this, the treatment process is more complex, and what's very innovative about this treatment is the holistic approach of we collect the water from the spring, which is collected down here. Before the water goes to a more active treatment system making use of the salt ionizers and other processes using energy such as pressurized sand filtration, we actually apply a range of processes which are free of energy or apply very little amount of energy. The first stage will involve underground storage in tanks, large tanks, and the reason for doing that is because it's spring water, the water is actually quite rich in minerals, especially iron oxides and other nutrients. It's a simple decantation process whereby the heaviest particle will simply settle down, and then the water is drawn out. It will then pass through a passive sand filtration. So we have a simple sand structure where the water will actually rise from below, go through the sand, through a simple process called capillarity, where the small pores in the sand will actually suck the water up, removing more particles. Then we have these very long ponds which are on the second floor of the resort. And these ponds actually contain so-called biofilters. So we use actually the ecosystem as a cleaning mechanism. We identify various species of plants which can remove certain toxins, which can remove certain heavy metals, for instance, and some other plants will play more common roles such as surface filtration, for instance. We also have a lot of wildlife within these ponds. Even though this is part of the treatment system of the pool, we have a lot of fish. We actually do aquaculture projects in these ponds as well. We grow different species of fish which we feed organically from waste from the kitchen. We also have an oxygenation process to keep the water body healthy, but also to generate some bacterial activity which play an important role in the cleaning process. And then the water will be pumped up, go to the active treatment system. And we have a very high water flow in the resort, one of the highest in Singapore. And what's interesting as well is the fact that we can only apply this high water flow because there's no chlorine in the water. Otherwise, with a chlorinated pool, it will actually be toxic due to chlorine vapors generated at the merging of the water. Energy solutions. There are many initiatives going on within the resort, but perhaps I will just select an interesting one, which actually makes use of the swimming pool as well. Because we decided to actually keep the resort air conditioned, and we actually thought many times to remove the air conditioning altogether and to just apply a simple naturally ventilated resort or fans. But this is another important aspect of sustainability. Actually, you also need to think from a business perspective and always kind of weigh if it really makes business sense. And the simple answer to that is that in Singapore, having a non-air conditioned resort doesn't make any business sense. We'll probably be out of business because of the requirement from the guests. So we decided to keep the resort air conditioned, but we have a very effective cooling system which is very energy efficient. So the chiller system for the air conditioning unit, actually we will cool down water. We do two things in one with one system. We will cool down water for the purpose of the air conditioning units, but in the process of doing so we also generate a lot of heat, which is kind of always associated with a cooling process. It's just that most businesses or companies they simply release the heat to the environment, which really doesn't make any sense. So here we capture this excess heat, or the heat generated, we store it, and then we recirculate the heat throughout the entire resort actually. So when people take a hot shower within the resort, it's actually heat generated from the cooling system. We actually made quite a number of upgrades to the chiller unit, to the point that it became even more and more efficient over time. To the point that even after running the hot water through the entire resort, we were still left with quite a lot of excess heat. That's when we came up with this simple idea of actually building a hot spa. You can see it on this picture here. So that's the pool there. Just on the side of the pool we have this small round, which is actually a heated water, which has a temperature of about 35 to even up to 39, 40 degrees on very hot days. Actually, one of the downsides of the system is the fact that because it's linked to the cooling system, the hotter the day, the hotter the pool actually, which is not really intended, but that's the way it is. This system is quite simple yet very innovative in this part of the world. It's one of the only systems of the kind in this part of the world, and I will explain why. First, we managed to have a hot spa which does not require any excess energy to be heated because it's just dissipating the heat generated from the cooling system. But because we actually run okay, let me explain. Actually, below we have the spa here, then we have this kind of pool bar there with a small solar system, which is different. The solar system is just used as educational for applying the light system and fans. And I will explain a bit later on why we don't have extensive solar panels at the resort. Below this is actually a big tank below, which is here. You can see an opening here. So we actually have what we call a heat exchange system here, where we will actually put the swimming pool water in contact with the heated pipes containing the hot water from the chiller system. So the pool water put into contact will actually heat up and it is then released to the spa here. So first we managed to have a hot spa because of this contact, this exchange, but because we also use put the hot water from the chiller system in contact with the swimming pool water, we also use the swimming pool as a cooling device for our chiller system. In other words, we use the swimming pool as a cooling tower. Since we've been doing this, we actually completely switch off our main cooling towers, which is within our chiller system, which really saves a lot of energy. Rooftop system, we have probably still the longest rooftop garden in Singapore, which extends about 100 meters long. This is a very self-sustained rooftop system. It's very self-sustained because it does not require any maintenance, it just maintains itself through rain events. A lot of people, they think of rooftop system as very demanding, high maintenance, a lot of technology involved. Actually, this system is very robust, it's been there since the beginning, yet very effective, and we'll just explain the basics. Actually, you can imagine some kind of tank sitting on top of the building. And the only important aspect about considering a rooftop system such as this one is a structural weight. So you cannot really put a rooftop like this on any building because it needs to be able to take on the weight. Let's say if there's a plug in the system somewhere, water will start to accumulate, and that adds a lot of weight. So it really needs to be designed in terms of structural weight. And this building is designed to hold a swimming pool. So we have this tank sitting on top. At the base of the tank we have this kind of a small slope. The slope is very important because most of the water which falls through the rooftop will actually be flushed out of the system. And then on top of this we have this kind of eggshell structures. By the way, the water which is collected coming out is very valuable because it's been filtered through the different layers that we have on top. So it's quite clean water already. Then on top we have some kind of eggshell structures which will accumulate just enough water to evaporate back to the system above, moisturizing the rooftop. And then on top we have different substrate, mostly sand actually. Why sand? Because if we go back you can see we have small trees on top, and of course trees, they have root systems, and below this building is actually guest room. So the last thing that we wish for is the roots to cause structural damage or leakage or a range of problems. Sand is actually a very effective way to keep roots from going further down because most species, such as the ones that we have, they really don't like sand at all. So when they reach the sand layer, they will simply spread and remain within the thin layer of soil that remains on top where the nutrients are contained. It's just enough to sustain the system. There's really multiple benefits of having this type of rooftop gardens. First, energy efficiency. This garden is actually very energy efficient. We can achieve, since the data that we've been collecting over time since the building have been there, we can clearly say that the average savings we get is we can reduce the energy load of the building below, which is air conditioned, by about 15 to 30%, which is actually very high. Going back to solar panels, we actually considered many times to cover the entire roof of the hotel, quite a large roof with solar panels. Then we took a step back trying to understand if it really makes business sense or sustainable sense if you want. Actually, the simple fact that in Singapore, solar energy is not that efficient. Why? Because of weather conditions first. There's always a lot of water vapor in the air, a lot of clouds which will already cut a lot of the power. But there's also a lot of dust in the air from industrial activities and so on. So the panels, even though there's different practices to prevent them from getting too dusty very fast, they will get quite dusty over time, too high maintenance as well. Especially where we are located. On the other side, actually, we can see a lot of big oil refineries and so on across the channel. Energy efficiency is very important. And when we actually compare the average efficiency of solar panels in Singapore, which is about 10% on converting factor depending on the condition, actually it's more efficient to have a rooftop, passive rooftop like this. If we think of solar energy not as fully providing the full energy needs, which is impossible in our case, we will need two large amounts of solar panels, but just a complement to grid electricity, it's actually more efficient to have a passive rooftop system. There are also many other benefits from rooftops, such as flood control, which is very important in a city like Singapore, especially if we think of scaling up such system at the city level. Other benefits will include just wildlife and increasement to have plant a lot of flowers and trees, which can actually bring a lot of wildlife to maximize a green coverage on top of structures. water, energy. Pest is another very important aspect of the management. Because of the overall concept of the resort, because we built the resort to preserve the land and all the trees, we actually have quite a rich biodiversity on site. We have a lot of, so we try to preserve these species over time by looking at the different practices that we have. One of them is pest control, and when I say pest, it's mostly mosquito control really. In Singapore, the conventional way of dealing with mosquitoes is a conventional fogging, which is actually a petrochemical derivative, which can be effective at pushing away mosquitoes, but it's also quite harmful to other types of life forms. So we actually went away from this conventional way of dealing with the mosquitoes to 3 different other techniques which are more respectful of the wildlife. The first technique that we use is actually another type of spray that we apply on a weekly basis, which is 100% organic. It's a process called BTI, which is also more targeted at the larval stage of the mosquito larvae, so more targeted and less damage to other life forms. The other practice that we use quite extensively is simply to utilize the ecosystem as a control mechanism. So we actually built a lot of natural ponds, water ponds around the resort, which contain a lot of life. There's fish inside them which will eat the larvae of the mosquitoes, but around the ponds there's actually a lot of, they provide a lot of habitats to a lot of life forms which are considered natural predators of mosquitoes, such as frogs, dragonflies especially, which can be very effective, small lizards and so on, which using the ecosystem to control mosquitoes can actually be very effective. In addition to this, we also apply a different treatment based on a technology of enzymes. It can also be very effective, but it's a bit expensive, so we only tend to use it from time to time for special events like weddings or when we want to be very sure in a specific location. Waste. We have a very effective waste management program at the resort. It all starts with the kitchen, where we segregate different types of food waste, especially fruits and vegetables. We then feed this food waste to earthworms, and the resort is actually home to probably the biggest worm farm in Singapore. We have more than 1 million earthworms. We don't just keep earthworms as pets, we just keep them for a specific purpose, which is to deal with our food waste in a very sustainable and useful way. So the earthworms, we feed the food waste to earthworms. So the earthworms, through their digestive system, they will digest all this and come up with a substance which we refer to as castings, which is actually the world's best fertilizer in terms of nutrient value and the form in which these nutrients are available to plants uptake. What's also unique about the process, not going into too much details today, but we actually combine the action of earthworms eating up the food with a bacterial activity. If you go to this wormery, you actually find it's not so smelly, it's quite clean for this type of system compared to similar worm farms that you may see around. One of the reasons is this synergy that we have between earthworms and bacterial activity. So the food doesn't really have time to decompose, so it become to rot and become smelly and generate a lot of liquid waste or other issues associated with these kind of processes. It's actually a very clean and effective system. Then we use the compost that we gain for the gardening around the resort, including the rooftop systems. We have vegetable gardens on the rooftop where we can grow this in a very organic way. We know exactly what's inside, it's very organic. And then we reintroduce this into the kitchen. So we have this kind of closed loop mechanism going on, demonstrating that it's possible to be self-sustained to some extent. We're still adjusting a few practices, but we hope one day to be 100% self-sustained. We just need to expand our production. Going now into CSR. By CSR in this resort, we tend to refer more about community work and social involvements. And this resort has been quite successful at doing this as well. So beyond just all the environmental work that we have and the various initiatives to preserve the site and the land, we also have a lot of initiatives which target communities in sharing a lot of practices that we do. Some of these programs include the Eco Tours, which has been a very successful initiative by the resort. We started doing these tours more actively about 4 years ago. So the idea is to bring a lot of interaction with multiple stakeholders. Another key initiative is the biodiversity.sg platform. Because biodiversity is so important to this resort, because the resort has managed to preserve a lot of the wildlife and play a special interest in the concept, we actually developed this international platform, and I won't talk so much about it, but if you have time you can just go and see the URL. And there's actually a lot of information on this platform, from information about biodiversity, but also sustainable development in a very holistic way, going back to the concept of biodiversity, which is often forgotten in sustainable practices and yet so important. Another initiatives I would like to share is perhaps programs going on within the resort itself in terms of employment practices. Actually, this resort employs quite a high amount of people which will be categorized as special needs, which can be from a mental illness to various disabilities of various severity. So we have quite severe case, for instance, of mental disease such as Down syndrome. We had a few people with this condition, as well as a lot of people with problems such as, I won't go through all of them, but just a range. And the fact that the resort employs a lot of people with disabilities is also a good initiative to give opportunities. And it actually, we find that over time, they actually integrate very well and specific tasks within the resort, such as with the kitchen, or the housekeeping department. We do a lot of publications as well. We share a lot of what we do on international platforms, on publications. We publish a sustainability report, which is actually published under the UN Global Compact, where we share a lot of details on what we do in terms of reporting. Philanthropy, this resort is also very active in just giving away to society. There are many initiatives that we sponsor outside of the resort, such as events or so on. But one of them I would like to highlight is, you probably heard of the New Natural History Museum in Singapore, which actually has the same name as this theatre, if I'm not wrong. At the time, they actually required a lot of sponsorship to bring these dinosaurs to Singapore. It's not cheap, and they actually bought these 3 full skeletons from the USA to Singapore. And the resort was actually the first donor to come on board. For the size of the resort, actually we gave a very big amount to initiate this sponsorship, and bigger players came on board, so made all this possible. So since then we have kept very close relationship with the Natural History Museum in Singapore. We even have a few bonds at the resort which were given to us in just appreciation of the donation. Just to finish off, to just go back to the key highlight of this talk and to the question whether a sustainability work can be sustainable in the business world. Well, going back to the specific case study of this resort, there are clear initiatives which are really not financially, with a financial mindset, which were really about giving back to society and employing people with disabilities, or doing a lot of things which are really research projects, and this resort does a lot of this. These are not financially driven, they're just a way of the result to give back, and we really feel that any business should allocate at least some percentage of their revenue for this kind of philanthropy initiatives. But there are parts of the business which clearly make very clear financial sense. And for this I will just give 2 numbers, which is our energy and water consumption. The result is probably one, if not the most efficient building in Singapore in terms of energy efficiency and water management. For a 200-room hotel, this is actually a very, very small amount to have to function on a monthly bill of $35,000, which is really the result of